Here we're going through step 1 of the version 3 data logger assembly. We have our completed Kestrel data logger board. We have the contents of the particle box that contains the particle module itself, the cellular antenna, the flat cellular antenna, and the 2.4 gigahertz antenna. We will not be using this for this assembly, so we can set it aside. We also have the micro SD card, and we have the M2 screw as well as an M2 washer that'll be used to secure the particle module. So the antenna will be mounted later, so we'll set that aside, but we will use that later during the board assembly process. Step 1, we'll install the micro SD card like so. Step 2, we will install the M2 screw, or install the particle module using an M2 screw and a P1 screwdriver. The module should be inserted at about 45 degrees, like so, and then pushed down such that this hole matches with this groove. We then put the screw in, and tighten it snugly. That's the completion of the pre-step for assembling the Kestrel logger. Now, before we move on to the second step, we're going to prepare the mounting plate. It may or may not be shipped in this fashion with the coating still on from the laser cutting process. If it is, you can go and press up underneath, separate the board from the backing. Being gentle to not crack any of these thinner portions, and set this aside. Now we can go and we'll need to remove this protective tape covering. All right, now we have our mounting plate ready to move on to the next step. Step 1 of the board subassembly is going to be attaching the two adhesive-backed antennas. We have the particle cellular antenna that we took out of the particle package before, and we also have the Molex GPS antenna. We have here our cleaned off, prepared mounting plate. And so now we're going to go and mount the antennas to this. Now we want to make sure that the surface is clean. You can use ISO to clean that if necessary. We will start with the GPS antenna, just peeling this backing off. You can hopefully see on this mounting plate these two outlines here and here that are etched into the surface. Those will be for the two antennas corresponding, the smaller one for the GPS, the larger one for the cellular. So we'll go here now. And place the antenna within that square, making sure that it's mounted flat. Now we'll repeat the process with the cellular antenna. Making sure that it's flat against the acrylic when we lay it down. There we go. So we now have both antennas mounted to the plate, and we're ready to move on to the next step of mounting the battery box. Now we're going to go ahead and prepare this mounting plate further. We've already attached the two antennas. Now we're going to mount the battery holder. So if the batteries have not already been installed in the battery holder, we'll do that now. You'll note the plus and minus indications on the PCB here, as well as within the battery holder itself. So those should line up thusly with the batteries. Just seat them like so. All right, that's now ready. Now I'll move on to the mounting process. Here we have our 440 nylon screws, two 440 nylon washers, and our 1-inch aluminum standoffs. So we'll place the battery holder like so, making sure that this antenna doesn't get caught underneath. We'll then start with these two furthest up mounts. We have a 3/32 hex here. So for these front two mounts, we'll use just a washer on the bottom, or sorry, just a nut on the bottom. And we'll just be tightening these so that they are snug, but not over tightening it to damage the screws. There we go. Now we'll go and install our standoffs in the same way. Here we'll have the screws coming up through the bottom, through the board, and into the standoffs. Again, just tightening them snugly. All right, now that we have that mounted, we're ready to move on to the next step. Now we're going to go ahead and mount the talons to the milled out logger box. Here we have the logger box. It's already been milled out. Here we have our STI-12 talon, our I2C talon, and our aux talon. For this, we'll need an 18 millimeter socket, a 10 millimeter and an 11 millimeter, as well as our torque wrench. So we will start with our I2C talon. We will remove the nuts from the M8 connectors. We will place that in the bottom two of these sets of holes, but note that they're polarized in such a way that you are forced to do that. We will just finger tighten these for now. Now repeat the process with the SDI 12 Talon. Just note that for this connector, the nut is actually different. Again, it will not work with the other connectors anyway, but noting that it is a different thread. All right, we have those two mounted. Now we'll go and mount our aux Talon in the same way. All right. Now we'll go through and torque all of these down. For all of these connections, we'll want them to be at 1 Newton meter of torque. So we'll start with we'll start with all of our I2C and SDI 12, these 7 connectors. That'll be done with an 11 millimeter socket. And then this last odd M8 connector actually uses a 10 millimeter socket. Now we'll go and use an 18 millimeter socket to tighten down the aux Talon M12 connections, but also to 1 Newton meter of torque. So now we have all of our Talon connections made, we can move on. Now we're going to go and install the cable gland for the solar panel connection. Here we have our solar panel connector, we have our cable gland, our torque wrench with a 15 millimeter socket, and a 19 millimeter wrench for the backing nut. So first we will take this apart. Thusly, we'll insert it through our hole here. Start tightening it down. We'll then tighten this down with a torque setting of 1.6 Newton meters. So we'll hold on to the back. There we go. We will then take our solar panel connector, insert it through the cap nut, and then insert it through the cable gland. It is a tight fit, but it will fit with just a little bit of pressure. And then we will just lightly screw this down for now. We'll torque this down later once we've connected this to the Kestrel auger to make sure that our cable length is correct. Now we're going to go ahead and install the populated mounting plate in the box itself. We prepared each of these earlier. We have the pre-prepared box, the pre-prepared mounting plate, our hardware for that, which are thread cutting, number 4 thread cutting screws, as well as washers, nylon washers. And we have our cable connector for the battery holder. So we go and we'll place this in here, making sure that the solar connector goes above the mounting plate, making sure we don't get any of our antenna cables underneath, like so. And then have a P1 Phillips. We're going to take our washer and screw combination like that. And in each corner, go and put these in. We just want these to be snug, but not overly so that it cracks the mounting plate. Okay, so we now have the mounting plate connection made. We'll go and connect our power cable and lay that down approximately, and we'll take care of that in the next step. So there we have our assembled box. Now we're going to go ahead and install the Kestrel data logger into the pre-assembled box. We have here our pre-assembled data logger, our pre-assembled box. For tools, I have a tweezers, 3/32 Allen wrench, a number 8, an 8mm socket, a P1 Phillips, and our Torx screwdriver. We have here our hardware for the switch. We also have our mounting hardware, 256 screws for our USB connector, as well as our USB dust cover. And then we have our 440 screws to mount to the top of our standoffs. So first we will connect our antenna here. I can't show you this very well, unfortunately. It connects on the bottom here. So we'll connect this to the cell terminal on the particle. All right, so we have that connected, and we'll run it like this underneath the device, making sure that the power cable stays on top of that and that the solar cable stays out of the way over here. So we have that connection now made. Now we need to put the switch through the openings over here. So first, we're going to go and place the O-ring onto the switch, making sure that's seated down into the groove that is allowed for it on the switch. I find the easiest way is to balance the switch in the neutral position. And we'll want the power cable to be running between these two batteries. So we'll try to keep that there, and just keeping an eye on this O-ring that it does not slip out and become unseated. There we go. So now we will go and we will attach our 440 mounting screws into the standoffs. And same as before, just tightening these snugly. Okay, now we'll make our internal connections here to the Kestrel logger. So we'll connect our battery cable there until it clicks. We will then connect our solar input until it seats in there. We'll take off the protective cover on the GPS antenna. We'll connect that to the antenna connector over here. There we go. We're gonna have that going off to the side a bit to reduce strain on this. Okay, so now we have all of our connections done internally. We'll go over here. So for connecting the switch, first we take our washer. There's a cut on here, or a nub I should say, that goes on the bottom, like so. Then we'll have our lock washer, and then we'll have our nut. You may need to straighten this switch out to get the nut on. We will just finger tighten that down. Then we'll go and take our torque wrench. This is set to 0.7 Newton meters with our 8mm socket. Tighten that down, and then place the switch in the downward off position. Next we'll go and we will connect our USB terminal over here. So we will just put a screw in here, and then on the further away hole, we will run that through our dust cover, and then we will insert that. Now we'll set our torque wrench to 0.3 Newton meters. We'll use a P1 bit and we'll tighten down our first screw. Then we'll go and we'll place our dust cover like this. And Tighten down our second screw such that the dust cover is not interfering with the USB itself there. And you can place that in. So now we have our Kestrel board installed. We'll move on to the next step. Now we'll go ahead and make the connections from the Talon boards to the Kestrel board. For that, we'll have 3 micro lock connectors, 2 50mm and 1 100mm. So we'll take 1 50mm and go from the I2C Talon, which is the lower of the 2, in here. Connect from there to port 2 on the Kestrel board. We will then go from the SDI-12 Talon, which is the higher of the 2, to port 1 on the Kestrel board. Like so. Then we'll connect using the longer 100mm cable. We'll connect from the aux Talon to port 3 on the Kestrel board. And that will include the connection of our Talons. Now we're going to go ahead and close the box up and perform the last steps before doing that. Before we go and we seal the box up, we're going to make sure that the battery board is in the on position, so the switch is pushed to the left toward the on indicator. We're then going to place our Deskin pack. That should be placed up here in the top region where there's a bit of a cutout that it'll seat nicely into, like so. We will then go ahead and secure our solar panel cable gland, which we've not done so yet. So we want to make sure it has a good amount of slack internally. And then we'll go and take our 15mm socket on our torque wrench, which is set for 1 Newton meter. And we will go and torque that down. We'll want just a little bit of red cable showing here to make sure that we get a good seal on the cable itself. There we go. Now we'll go and actually put the lid on the box. So we have the lid here as well as the screws that were supplied with the box. We'll need to go and thread these through the lid till they become seated, like so. Let's repeat that process. Now we're going to place the lid on and tighten these down just snugly for the moment. Now we'll go through and actually torque them down. We have a number 2 P2 Phillips here. And our torque wrench set for 0.9 Newton meters. And there we go. We're now done with our V3 data logger assembly.